Oh, where are my dear mothers? Oh, where can they be? Oh, where are my dear mothers? 'Cause the world's breaking at my door. Yes, the world's breaking at my door. And where are my sisters and my brothers? Oh, where can they be? Tell me, where are my sisters and my brothers? 'Cause the world's, it's breaking at my door. Yes, the world's breaking at my door. And where are my dear children? Who will keep them well? Yes, where are my dear children? 'Cause the world is breaking at my door. Yes, the world is breaking at my door. Broken is universal. It's universal. It is a journey through the deeper waters of this being human. Some of the things that we said this morning are broken in our communities. We're all on a journey through the deep waters of gun violence, heroin addiction, the justice system and its brokenness, drug violence, drug usage, issues with our education, our healthcare, cooperation or lack thereof. People are broken, common courtesy is broken. There's a lack of community, there's no sense of shared experiences, heroin addiction, the EU-UK connection, business as usual, and isolation. So the song that I just offered to us is a song about isolation. And when we experience brokenness as people, as communities, the biggest danger is to experience isolation. To ask that question, where are my people? The world is breaking, and I don't know where my connections are. So I think that there is a really beautiful connection between what is broken in the world and restoration. I consider myself a restorative artist. Other ways of calling it are arts and healing, community arts, and it's something I've been practicing for the past 10 years in various forms. And there's this pathway that we take as human beings from brokenness into restoration, and I wholeheartedly believe that art making is the way to get from here to there. It's one of the most powerful ways. There are, of course, many other ways. But from my completely non-objective perspective, the arts are where it's at because the arts build resilience. And so, my challenge to us today, as broken as our world is, I think we could probably all agree there's a lot of brokenness. Let's think about resilience, about our capacity to bounce back after something crazy like Orlando happens. What do we do? How do we recover? And how can we as artists, as creative people in our communities be a part of that healing, a part of that change? Okay, so that's where we're going today. Welcome to 9 a.m. on Friday. Thank you for being here. It's lovely to see your faces. And I'll move into the mic now. All right, so brokenness. The opposite of brokenness is restoration. So we have this opportunity as people. You know what? I'm not going to use the mic, I don't think. Can you all hear me if I just talk? Okay, that feels a little better for me. Okay, so there is this way of resilience. It's really interesting. I think resilience has some predictable factors about it. So I've had the opportunity to travel all over the world and to ask people questions about their experiences of resilience. And it's amazing to me. There are a couple of things that always show themselves. One is that people almost always, when I ask them to describe resilience, say that resilience is the capacity to bounce back. So I hear this thing about bouncing. There's this shared human understanding that in order to thrive, to be well in the world, we have to be elastic. We have to be able to take a fall. Does that resonate with folks? Like, we have to be able to bounce back. And that's universal, absolutely universal. I hear that all over the place. Other things people say about resilience are resilience is the capacity to keep growing even when there is a ton of adversity in our lives. So that's another perspective of resilience. And then another understanding that I just hear quite often has to do with the way of fostering resilience. And so I think something that is also universal and shared is that brokenness is inevitable. So we can try, and I think in the US we do try pretty hard, we can try to pad our lives and make ourselves so comfortable and safe that we don't have to experience a lot of brokenness. That's a route, that's a way we can go. But there's this shared belief, I think, across the world that to experience brokenness is not such a bad thing. It makes us more human. It makes us more capable. It gives us an experience of some of the deeper things of life. And so the way of fostering resilience is in the care and creation of recovery processes rather than the avoidance of brokenness. So that's what we're talking about this morning, is how do we care enough to create positive recovery processes for our communities, and what does that have to do with the arts? Okay, so whenever I travel, I always ask these questions to communities. I ask, what is resilience? And I told you a little bit about that. People generally tend to say it's the capacity to bounce back after something difficult, and that's a universal shared understanding. There's a lot of research behind that as well. If you want to start to get into resiliency research, you'll just hear a lot of this. People tend to agree it's the ability to bounce back. But then I also ask another question, and that is, what makes you resilient? And these might sound like they're the same questions, but they are in fact quite a bit different, because the first question we can say is universal. Everyone has like a pretty shared definition. And the second question is completely contextual to culture. So what makes you resilient is a cultural question. It's a question that requires us as artists and people working in our communities to listen and to pay attention to the specific factors of a community. So everywhere that we go, we interact with multiple cultures at play, multiple cultural practices, and we as individuals probably have ways that we keep ourselves healthy and strong that differ quite dramatically from perhaps somebody in India who's trying to do the same thing. So there's a bit of a difference between what is universal and shared about resilience and what is culturally contextual. And so we have to listen for that when we're working with communities. All right, here's a definition of resilience that I really like. It's a beefy definition by Dr. Michael Unger, who is the director of the Resilience Research Center, and they've done quite a lot of wonderful work. Look them up if you get a chance. And so how he defines resilience is he says that in the context of exposure to significant adversity, resilience is both the capacity of individuals to navigate their way to the psychological, social, cultural, and physical resources that sustain their well-being, and their capacity individually and collectively to negotiate for these resources to be provided in culturally meaningful ways. And so that last part of the definition around being culturally meaningful, I think this is especially where the arts and culture come into resiliency building, into providing us with some answers for how do we approach a broken world. Another important definition around resilience comes from Dr. Kathy Malchiodi, who is an art therapist, and in Psychology Today, she says, the resilience-enhancing capacities of art expression are not found in any one particular art form. So we're not saying that visual arts provides more resilience than music. That's not what's important. What's important is that the art making itself cultivates resilience. So it's actually just about creativity, the design process, the making of the art, the work that we did this morning over here. That's where the gold is. That's where people start to build resilience. All right, so how do we craft practices for bouncing back? Raise your hand if you have a practice that you use to bounce back when things in your life become difficult. Awesome. Maybe perhaps raise your hand if you have a curiosity around what that could look like, what kind of practices you could develop. Cool. Okay, so curiosity, I think, is the foundation for any good learning and teaching. And so I encourage you, as we continue this morning, to perhaps make note of what you're curious about. All right, so resiliency mapping. I'm going to pass around these maps, and we're going to spend a little bit of time with this. Okay, so something that's very important to understand about resilience is that a lot of resiliency work has to do with perception of our resources. And so what I mentioned before about isolation is really important here. So after something breaks in our communities, oftentimes people feel isolated. They're victimized, perhaps, and they feel isolated. So reconnecting is really important. And having a perception, a knowledge of the ways in which you are supported and cared for is one of the best ways to start to be able to recover quickly, to know, I am supported in these ways. And so this process that we're going to go through quickly here is one of I think one of the best processes that I have found for doing this work with both children and adults all over the world around identifying resiliency factors. So the first question is really quite simple. It is, I am. So I am refers to your personal strengths, your attitudes, feelings, beliefs. And the question here is, how can we use art making to encourage self-care, empathy, altruism, pride in self, hope, and trust? So I am. Why don't you take a few moments to think about this for yourself? I fully believe that we can't teach and do work in our communities that we don't also do for ourselves. And so often what I do when I'm teaching and working with people is I ask for my folks to start by asking themselves these questions first before asking anyone else. So go ahead and take a few moments to write your personal factors of resilience. These are the I ams. Is that clear? Okay. Okay, so the next factor for determining how resilient are we is to finish this prompt. I have. And so I have is the ability to identify external supports and resources, including trusting relationships, access to services and resources, and autonomy. Okay, so these are the things that we have that are external to ourselves. I am is who am I and how is it that I am resilient? I have is who am I connected to? What are my external assets? All right, and the last prompt is I can. So this refers to our social and our interpersonal resiliency. Skills like communication, problem solving, managing feelings. That's especially helpful for children who are dealing with trauma and difficulty. Developing trusting relationships. What can you do? When shit hits the fan, what do you do? What assets do you have that relate to the community around you? So in this circle, we're slowly moving outward, so we can see how we could move from isolation to connection, perhaps. I am, I have, I can. Okay, so I recommend that you spend time on your own continuing to fill this out. I'm sure that you're just kind of getting to the tip of the iceberg in terms of your personal resiliency factors. There are probably many. And another way that this activity can be useful to you and to communities of people is that it can help you identify where you need to strengthen some of your assets. So what's missing? That's a really important question for communities that are healing from brokenness, is what's missing? So that between now and the next event, perhaps we can strengthen some of the things that we are missing so that next time something happens, you can recover more quickly, have more resilience. When I work with communities, I'll use these prompts as we, and we'll have circle-based community conversations around, okay, we are, we have, and we can. Yes, we can. Okay, so the artist, where does the artist fit in? So I see artists in this process of wading through the waters of brokenness that we all experience. I see the artist as being a navigator, a leader, a vision holder, someone who is truly able to see. And so that's part of the design and creation process, is to be able to see the story as it's unfolding, as well as seeing a vision for a hopeful future. So in a lot of my work, I use that vocabulary. I say, what is your vision for a hopeful future? Because I truly believe that it's almost impossible to get from brokenness to restoration without a good story. So what's the story? How do we get from here to there? And why is it important to move from here to there? It's very simple. It's very easy, not simple, very easy for communities to get stuck in brokenness and for us as individuals to get really stuck. in our brokenness. And so holding the vision is something that I think artists do particularly well, perhaps better than many other people in our communities, because we tend to see creatively, right? We have that capacity to craft a story and to be creative. And then there's this element of learning to see in the dark, as I call it. So in times in which things are breaking left and right, like the song that I gifted us with at the beginning, who can see what's next? Are we just stuck there? Or is there a light at the end of the tunnel? And sometimes the artist, when you're lucky and you have enough skills and tools, you can remind people that there is an end in sight and perhaps even help them travel towards it. All right, so a little bit about my work. This is a project that I've been doing ever since, let's see, this is very new for me, the May Final Friday at Indigo Hippo downtown. I got this idea, Alicia's here, I see you, hey. I got this idea of building a city of resilience and vibrancy. And we got to practice this over here. And so ever since then, it's a tool that I've been using with communities, with trainers and facilitators to get us to think about how can we build more resilient and connected, vibrant communities. And so each of those building blocks that we added to the table over there, we can think of as resilience building factors. And I saw some things on there that I thought were wonderful. I saw love and friendship in my skills, my work, a lot of beautiful things. So make sure before you leave today you get some time to walk around our collective project, our City of Resilience. So when I work with communities, I like to use resources that are very accessible. Cardboard happens to be something that you can pretty much find anywhere. And so I do a lot of work with cardboard and have done that kind of work in India and Haiti, where we're using the arts to ask a deeper question. So it's not art for art's sake. We're not just building this because it looks beautiful. It's wonderful that it looks beautiful. But we're asking a deeper question, which is what makes you resilient and vibrant? Because if you can see it and understand it, you can move from the isolation of brokenness into a space of healing. I'm a mosaic mural artist, and so this is a craft that I think has a very obvious and direct relationship with brokenness, and I've had some really wonderful teachers throughout my time. I learned the craft from Isaiah Zager in Philadelphia, who did the Magic Gardens in Philly, and he's responsible for hundreds and hundreds of these gorgeous mosaics around the world now. And then I also studied with a group in Chicago. And so from my perspective, when we talk about mosaic making as a community, what we're literally doing is taking broken pieces, broken stories, broken metaphors, and we're putting them back together to craft a vision for a hopeful future. So the picture on the left is a project that I did with a bunch of teachers in Philadelphia who were trying to understand how they could inspire resilience and a sense of hope in their students. And so we worked with that, and every single one of those tiles has a story and an individual attached to it. So it becomes this canvas, this quilt, so to say, of resilience, vibrancy, and these things we're talking about this morning. And I'll end with this story. So after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, I had the opportunity, I've been several times since then, but I had the opportunity to go and to work in Port-au-Prince with a group of Haitians who were running an orphanage, and the orphanage was particularly hit by the earthquake. It was pretty much destroyed. They did lose some of their people as well. And when I arrived, there was this real sense of being stuck in brokenness. There hadn't even been enough personal power, agency, and energy to clean up the rubble. So there's literally still rubble everywhere. And so what I didn't do is I didn't start fixing the problem. I didn't start running around, picking up rubble, and telling people what to do. What I did is I sat down with everybody and I said, what's happening? What is happening here? What is your story? Where have you come from? Tell me about this event, and where do you want to go? And as soon as those kids and the folks who run the place got a clear vision of where they want to go, they had that place looking awesome in like a week. And so what we did is we took stones from the rubble, from the earthquake, and we painted them, and we created these really amazing mosaics from the rubble, and we created a space within the orphanage for the children to use as their own personal healing space, their artistic, creative healing space. And they decided that what they wanted to do is create a threshold, and so they painted a bunch of rubble rocks blue, and they made this threshold around their space, and they had to dance across the threshold or sing across the threshold every time they entered and every time they left, because it reminded them that it was a special place and that in that space they were safe. So these kids are celebrating the creation of their beautiful work and the restoration of their space from literally rubble into something that was safe again, creative, vibrant, full of color, full of life. And one of my favorite things about Haitian culture is that they always say, if you cannot smile through brokenness, you are not Haitian. So you have to learn to smile through brokenness. And I think that's what this is all about, is to be resilient, vibrant people living a good life. We must learn how to smile, like genuinely have joy through brokenness. What does that look like? And so my curiosity in life that inspires me to do the work that I do and to keep asking questions is, how are the arts involved in this process? What does it mean to be a creative individual? Asking questions about moving individuals, myself included, and communities from a space of brokenness to restoration. How can we bounce back a little more quickly each time? How can we not avoid those deep waters of brokenness, the difficulties, and rather learn how to swim, learn how to see in the dark? All right, that's it. So I'm happy to take some questions. We have a little bit of time. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead. Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit of your story, how you got into the story of art? Is it a personal journey?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just a second. Let me grab a drink of water. Okay, so the question was, can I tell a little bit about my story and how I found myself working in restorative arts? Thank you for that question. Gosh, let's see. So I was living, I'll go back a little further than that, actually. My mother is a community artist, so I grew up around the arts. And I grew up around a person who is incredibly passionate about using art making to help people tackle really big issues. So she's explored the connection between quilt making and racism, how to heal some really deep racial wounds. She grew up in Detroit during the race riots and just has had some pretty intense experiences. And she has used the arts herself. So I grew up in this sort of culture of using the arts to craft a better story. And so I've always been in love with it. When I moved but I never considered myself an artist, I should say that, ever. I studied psychology in undergrad, and then I moved to Philly to do some service work. And as I was doing the work, I kept finding that people just want to make art. Like, that's what kids want to do. They're like, let's draw some stuff, let's paint some stuff, let's do some stuff. And as I would work with different groups of kids, these really deep questions would come up, like, what's going on with gun violence? what's going on in my school, these sort of things. So I found myself essentially working through some of those deeper questions with kids and using the arts. And that kind of led me to explore some further education. So I have a master's degree in community arts with a focus on restoration, on arts and transformation. So that work has carried me all over the place. I've been able to work with the United Nations, connecting the arts and placemaking to community leaders, particularly in Haiti, who are working to create safe places for their kids. So yeah, that's a little bit of the story. Are there any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, where did you get that master's degree?
There is a program in Philadelphia called Eastern University, and I went there. Yep. Yeah, and they're actually, so the field of community arts is growing quite tremendously, as some of you probably know. I think there's a lot of folks in this room who work in community arts, and so there are more and more master's degree programs popping up, particularly around arts and healing. And so for me, it was important, actually, not to go get, what I didn't want was a counseling degree. I knew I wanted to work with groups of people and not individuals. So it wasn't appropriate for me to go into art therapy. That's not what I wanted. What I wanted was a community perspective. And so that's a field that's pretty new, but it's growing enough that there are more and more opportunities to study how the arts interact with groups of people as opposed to just, one-on-one individuals. Okay. Yes, here.
What if you see yourself being frustrated with the ability to create art? A lot of folks that I encounter say, I'm not an artist, I'm not
Yes.
in my comparison, I'm not as good as you, I'm not as good as what I see.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that frustration when people just frankly draw energy from within and you don't want to express it outside?
That is such a good question. That comes up every single time I work with any group of people. So here's what I hear. I'll say, hi, my name's Amy. I'm here so that we can create some work together. Let's just go ahead and get started. I like to jump right into things. I'm not too much of a tell people what we're gonna do before we do it kind of person. We're just gonna do it. And here's what happens right away, is this resistance comes up from folks that is, but I am not an artist. Or like, how many people, raise your hand if you've heard like a million people say, I don't have a creative bone in my body. Like, you literally do. That is all that you are. And so for me, the way that I've tackled that is to be very hospitable and very open. And so what that looks like is saying, like, why don't you just give it a shot? Like, no one here is a professional, so saying things like that can be helpful. And then also there's a definition that I like to use about art. And so my favorite definition of art, and this will probably like kill some fine art folks, I'm sorry, but this is my favorite definition. And it's, art is the act of putting things together. So it's the act of putting things together. And so when you tell people, do you know how to put things together? They're like, well, yeah. So that's what we're doing. And we're just we're using our right brain a little bit. Yeah, so I think that being hospitable, being very kind and open when people have that response, and then breaking it down and just making it as simple as possible. And then, so I actually had this experience on Saturday. I was doing a mural in Price Hill, where I live. I don't think I've mentioned that. I live in Price Hill. And this guy came up with his niece and his nephew, and I was like, hey, do you want to get involved? Do you want to get in here? And he's like, no, I'm not an artist, I'm not an artist. And I was like, okay, cool, fine. Well, you can just watch for a while. Why don't you just like hang around and watch, because it's pretty fun. And after like 5 or 10 minutes, he's like inching closer, right? He's like getting a little closer. I was like, hey, I think maybe you want to give it a try. And once he started, he was there longer than anybody. He stayed for like 3 hours, and his niece and his nephew helped me clean the whole thing up. And it was a cool reminder to me of like, just let people observe for a while until they feel comfortable enough coming in. But keep it open, like keep that connection and that invitation going. And sometimes if people are curious enough, they'll just kind of end up like painting with you for 3 hours. Yeah. All right, let's see. I think we probably have time for a couple more questions. Go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit about your process when you're working with communities?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let me see how I can break it down. I have a pretty specific process, and it's taken a while to develop it, and it's also heavily influenced from where I went to grad school and the people who taught me, because I think they've found a really effective way of working with people in the arts. And so there's an organization called Build a Bridge International, and they're based in Philadelphia, and they work at connecting artists to communities experiencing brokenness. That's their mission. And they have found throughout their 25 years or so of work, and they were really thought leaders in this process, they have found certain ways of doing things. And so I'll just share a couple, and then I would encourage you, if you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, to connect with Build a Bridge, because we do trainings all the time, all around the world, actually. And there's also a distance learning online model that they do, so you can get some training online. So Build a Bridge International is awesome. They're my favorites. So one of the things that's really important to me is to create a sense of sacredness. And I'm not talking about religious sacredness. I'm talking about something that's outside of the ordinary. And so when people are making art with me and with each other in a space that I am holding and offering, they know that it's different than their time at home. Okay, so they're doing something that's a little different. And one of the ways that I do that is I create this threshold. So this threshold, it's literally a physical marker. For example, the stage, where I know that on this side of the stage, my role is a certain thing, and on that side of the stage, it would be something different. So when people come into a space that I'm using, they may cross over something that's gorgeous. Like I'll take the time to use the arts to build like a gorgeous doorway or a gorgeous thing on the ground that they have to walk over. And I don't even say anything about it. I don't say like, welcome across the threshold. I keep it real simple. And so that they just know, it just triggers something. And that comes from a bit of feng shui as well. Like it just triggers something so that you know like this space is not ordinary. And it helps people feel safe immediately. I also start by singing. I'm not a trained, like I don't sing usually, you know, like I kind of do it for fun. But I've learned to sing in front of I just sing in front of people all the time because it's nice. Like, who doesn't like to be sung to? And so I usually start by singing. And I like to start with songs that are usually quite a bit more joyful than what we started with today. But I like to start with songs that people can join in on because everybody loves to sing when it comes down to it, especially kids. So those are two things that I do, the threshold, a song at the beginning, and then we get into the art making. And we always at the end have a checkout. Like how was that for you? Like, what was that experience like for you? What did you learn? What surprised you? Would you like to come back? Hopefully, yeah. So there's a little nugget right there. All right, let's see. Do we have till 10? Okay, cool. Yeah, we've got quite a bit more time, so go ahead, yeah.
Does art therapy and talk therapy seem different?
Yeah.
Are there two different ways to get to the same place, or do they go to different places?
And you said art therapy and what? Talk therapy. Oh, thank you for asking that question. That's a great question. Okay, so traditionally, the way, at least over the last 200 years or so, the ways in which we've approached trauma in people's lives is through talk therapy, which is very left brain oriented. And so what we're doing in talk therapy is we're talking through our experience, and it can be really helpful to some degree. It can also be incredibly re-traumatizing, especially for children. So children, and this is something that I think is important for everyone to know, children can actually physically experience trauma just by hearing a story. They don't even have to physically be present for the trauma. So we have to be real careful of our words and what we say around kids, because it just goes right into their little bodies. And they take it right in. And then they have to work it out. So that's why we see a lot of crazy stuff in our schools and stuff. Talk therapy is pretty limited. I think from an art therapy perspective, it's quite limited in what it can ultimately resolve, because trauma is stored on the right side of the brain. And so we store all of our trauma in the right hemisphere. And so the way to access that is through creativity. It's through the arts. Through song is actually really effective. Music is one of the most effective ways. Dance is also very effective because trauma impacts our bodies. And so, let's see, the podium's a little limiting. So often we see in children who've experienced a lot of trauma, there's really predictable things that happen in their bodies, like this is one, and this shows us I am experiencing a ton of anxiety because my world is scary and it's broken. So my shoulders are up like this all the time. The other is like, we call it the Brooklyn chest, and it's like this. Like, I can do it. I'm here I am, right? So we see, these are two things we see a lot in children, and they usually let us know that there's some trauma involved. And so talking about this, like, I'm not sure how far you can get talking about, like, well, why are your shoulders up so high? Like, what's that about? But dancing about this, like, what does it look like to work with a child to go from here, to experiencing a sense of alignment and uprightness? That is powerful stuff. And it's probably going to go a lot further in that person's life than talking. All right. Good.
What kinds of things do you do around Cincinnati?
Yeah, sure. Good question. Well, let's see. For one more week, I am the art education director for the Baker Hunt Art and Cultural Center in Covington. I've been there for a few years, and it's been a wonderful experience. And so I've done quite a lot of art administration, which is not actually the best fit for me. So I'm moving on to get back into this work. A lot of my work has been internationally focused. Quite a bit of work in Chicago, New Orleans, Philly, Haiti, India. And here in Cincinnati, my partner who's in the back, Chris, and myself, we have a community house that we call the Sankofa House. It's in Price Hill. And we do workshops, retreats, trainings. You can find us on Facebook. It's Sankofa House Cincinnati. Sankofa is Sankofa. And it means go back and get it. Go back and get what you forgot so that you can move forward with your life. It's actually all about like healing. And so that's a way that I really practice this stuff, is using my home as a safe space for people to come and explore some of these ideas. I also have worked with Grailville, doing similar things, and Imago Earth Center, and so I'm connected to those places as well. Yeah. All right, I think we probably have time for one last question. Yeah.
Any suggestions for how we can integrate this?
Yeah. That's a great question, and actually, I will take the opportunity for a teaching moment, and I'd like to throw that back to you all. And so maybe partner with someone next to you and just talk about that for a minute. Be curious about how you could integrate some of this stuff. I think it's so, to answer that question, I would have to say it depends like 12 times. I have to be, well, it depends. But so it's so specialized to who it is that you are in your world. Who are you to yourself, to your communities? How does this translate to you? It might be completely different than what I have to say. I will say I'm super open to, I love grabbing coffee with folks. I love taking walks and talking about things. I'm also open for, doing like contract work and stuff like that too. So you can contact me afterwards, come up to me afterwards if you want to talk more. So briefly, just to finish this out, why don't you turn to the person next to you or group up with people and just share, like, what are you going to take away from this? Like, how could you possibly integrate some of this into what you already do? I think that'll close us out.